you for joining me. Welcome back to my channel. Tonight we're going to try something a little bit different. I've never done this before, but I have really been into reading. I've always been into reading, but I've really been into reading the last couple of weeks, particularly during quarantine. And I thought that it would be really cool to have like a dinner date kind of thing and discuss some of the books that I've been reading. And I figured I'd pick one book per evening, and yeah, it'll be like a book and a dinner kind of date. So that's the idea around this whole thing. If it works, great. If it doesn't, you know, scroll past and don't watch. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do with the background. It may come in handy if I edit later, and I want to put in a picture. I have a nice blank spot for that. I don't know. Again, this whole thing is a trial and error. We're trying to figure it out. Tonight for dinner, we are having some lemon pepper broccoli, some air-fried French fries, and some chicken hearts. One of my favorite animal proteins is chicken hearts. And the idea of eating on camera is both terrifying and exciting at the same time, but I need something to do while talking. And for our drink, I'm having a strawberry sea light, which is a sugar-free water. A sugar-free drink mix for water. In case you are wondering, I'm going to point it out just in case you didn't already notice, there is a bruising here under my chin. Don't worry, I'm fine. I had a cosmetic treatment that's supposed to help with the loose skin and the fat under my double chin as I continue to lose weight. It's a way to help prevent sagging skin as I continue to lose weight. So if that bothers you, if it offends you, let me know in the comments. Anyway, moving on. Tonight's book I want to discuss is The Hunger Games. I had never seen the movies, nor had I read the books before. I actually have only read the first book. It took me about a week to get through. And surprisingly, I thought it was an absolutely awesome book. Chicken hearts are very good. I'm going to try very hard not to talk with my mouth full at the same time. So I may put a little music over or something so that while you're watching me chew, there's something for you to listen to other than just the sounds of my mouth. Again, this is one of the parts that's scary about eating on camera. Anyway, I'm sure I will get over it. So the book is surprising. And if you have never read the book, if you intend to read it and you don't want spoilers, spoiler alert right now with regard to this publication, because I'm going to kind of summarize the plot and then I'll talk about some of the themes. And then my favorite thing is to compare it to the movie representation. And that's kind of where the theme of all this is going to go. I love reading books that have been made into movies or TV shows. And that's kind of the inspiration to talk about the difference between the two. The sauce that is on my plate is a healthy, low-calorie honey mustard that they make here. I got it at the farmer's market. And I like that on both my broccoli and my French fries. And everything is seasoned with some of my Jardin de Graus lemon pepper seasoning. Jardin de Graus is a organic food store nearby. So, a little bit about the Hunger Games. Overall summary of the plot. The story takes place in a dystopian future where they're not clear if it's the United States or if it's North America. Different versions of like summaries and stuff will tell you one way or the other. But the larger part of The larger part of North America is now turned into a country called Panem, and the population is divided up into 12, it used to be 13 different districts. And each district has its own specialty, its own source of economy. That's what I'm looking for. So one of them has agriculture, the other one is mining. The District 12, where our main character comes from, is coal. There's gems, all sorts of things. I don't remember all of them off the top of my head. So the main character, Katniss, comes from District 12, where the main source is coal. And we're introduced to Katniss very early, as obviously is the main character. She lives with her mother, who is despondent most of the time, and then she takes care of her little sister, who is also in practice a daughter. She's also raising her little sister, and her sister means the world to her. And part of the driving force through the novel is her taking care and looking after her sister. And so we're introduced that hunting and poaching is forbidden. You get the rations that the government gives you and anything that you can salvage or save in the meantime. So while Katniss goes out to hunt, we're also introduced to the character of Gail Hawthorne, who is a buddy of hers and a budding romantic interest for Katniss. They're clearly friends, and she has confusing feelings about how she feels towards him. He comes into play later in the book as just kind of a steady male figure in her life. Sometimes she looks at him like a brother, sometimes like a friend, sometimes his romantic interest. But we get to know who he is throughout, kind of who he is to her throughout the series. So when we're introduced to Katniss, it is the day of the reaping, and this is when the government has decided that a boy and a girl from every district, and there's 12 in the story, are to be selected to play in the Hunger Games, which is a reality show competition series that's broadcasted around the nation, where the tributes, as they're called, fight to the death until there is one person left. And then the one person left is the victor of the Hunger Games, and they get to be removed from living in the districts in a form of poverty, and they get to live on Victor's Row, which is kind of a celebratory thing for returning from the Hunger Games. And so the day of the reaping, apparently it's like a whole big thing, because the government treats them as if it's not a big deal, as if they don't know what really happens. So, Katniss is out hunting, she talks to Gail, they talk about their plans moving away, and then we come back and then we get ready for the reaping. And that's where we get to know a little bit about who Prim is to her, how the mother became despondent when the father died, how they kind of survive on a day-to-day basis, and kind of how life works in District 12. Then the reaping happens, and the names are put in, and then Effie Trinket, who is a ambassador from the government, comes in, and she picks one boy and one girl. So despite her name only being in the drawing once, Primrose Everdeen, Prim, the younger sister of Katniss, is the female that is chosen. So Katniss goes and, out of panic, volunteers as tribute, volunteers to participate in the Hunger Games in place of Prim, which apparently is in the rule book, but it's also very dramatic, and everybody loves to see something like that. So it's kind of a passionate moment where we see how much Prim really means to Katniss. And it's important because, again, Prim is kind of the driving force behind Katniss in the book and in the movie. I'll admit the french fries are not as good as they could be. With all the angles and stuff that I did setting up, now my french fries are cold, but it's also the last portion I have of the french fries, so not a big deal at all. And the boy that is chosen from the district, so Katniss volunteers, and then the boy that is chosen from the district is Peta Mellark, who is the baker's son, and we learn has had interactions with Katniss in the past. They went to school together, and at one point in her past, when things were really, really low, he saved her by giving her some bread that he purposely burned. and she feels indebted to him because he helped her. Then, over the next couple of chapters, they get ready for the games. So they are taken away from their families. They get to say goodbye. They are then transported to the capital, where they get guidance from Haymitch, who was the previous winner of the Hunger Games several years ago. He's now a drunk, but only from District 12. I'm sorry, the only victor from District 12. So over the next couple of days, they are Hollywood-ified, which goes through waxing and a stylist and appearance, and they're paraded around the Capitol, and they have interviews. And throughout this time, you get to know kind of who Katniss is and the fact that she's very insecure around people. Really, her life, since her father died, has been about putting food on the table and being the main supporter for her family. We learn how much of a disdain she has for the Capitol, and throughout the interviews, she is very distrusting of Peta, particularly because she knows that at the end of the games, only one of them is going to be able to survive. So the last day before they go into the arena, they have their final interviews, and in the final interview, Peta announces that he has had a crush on Katniss, and has been, he doesn't really say the word love, but he says that he has romantic feelings for her, and Katniss doesn't know how to respond to this, so her first initial response is anger, and then Haymitch convinces her that this story, because it is a story, is good for sponsors, people to send you things during the games in order to keep you alive. And then this kind of overarching people in love, star-crossed lovers as they call it, becomes the theme of her story, and it makes her publicly desirable, as he calls it. So then we actually enter into the games, and we are several chapters in at this point. We actually enter into the games, and throughout the training we got to see a little bit of the main characters and the other tributes. Not a lot of them, because Katniss keeps to herself and you're not really allowed to interact with the tributes, but we see that there are what are called career tributes. So from the higher and more wealthy districts, the children will train for this, and when their reaping comes at a certain age, they'll volunteer because they've spent the last several years training for such a thing. So districts, I think it's like districts 1 and 2 are careers, and then literally the other districts are killed off relatively quickly. We learn a little bit about District 11 because the character of Rue, who is a young girl from District 11, reminds Katniss of Primrose, her sister, and she immediately has kind of an affinity for her. And we also learn about Thresh, who is the other tribute from District 11. We don't learn a lot about their personalities because everything is told from Katniss's perspective. So they enter into the arena to participate. Now the games themselves can take place on any level of terrain. So one of them was in a desert, one of them was in like an icy tundra. But this particular game, as they find out, happens to be in literally like what we would consider the outdoors. There's hills, there's rivers, there's a plain, there's a lake, there's trees, all of which are important because we know that that connects back to Katniss's history with her ability to hunt. So they enter into the arena, and she's looking around trying to figure out the best way to get a weapon and then distance herself from the other tributes. And again, I'm summarizing very quickly. There's obviously a lot more. It's a 300-page book. Please go read it. And I'll talk about why you should read it and not watch the movie here in just a moment. She ends up taking a backpack, and she separates herself from the tributes, and her first issue is that she needs to find water. So she goes through, I would say, relatively accurate survivalist practices in terms of finding water. And then she spends a lot of her time in the trees. And the first day after the battle at the cornucopia, which is where all the weapons and things are stashed, she kind of finds solace in the trees and just kind of surviving. So the game makers find that very unentertaining, and they start a forest fire to get her to go back toward the other tributes to encourage her to interact. Now, the first day, over 13 of the tributes die. I think it's 13. It could be 11. I could have those numbers mixed up. Almost half of the tributes die the very, very first day at the cornucopia. It's why it's like the most exciting day of the games. And after the forest fire, she suffers some severe burns, some other injuries, and then she does in fact run into the group of the career tributes as well as Peta, who are trying to track her, and they chase her up a tree. And I don't remember if this, I think this is the second day. If it's not the second day, it's like the third or fourth. I don't remember the exact timeline. I just remember the key events. So she's chased up a tree, and then they spend the night at the bottom of the tree because they can't climb it the way she can. And then while she is there, she sees Rue, who is also an avid tree climber, who proves herself to be an ally by pointing out a tracker jacker, a genetically modified tree nest, wasp nest, up above her. So the plan is for her to cut the nest down and send a swarm of bees to attack the other tributes down below her. I'm eating in a rhythm, not particularly on purpose, it just is kind of happening. So she does send the wasp after him, she gets stung herself, and then she ends up getting the bow and arrow, which is her weapon. I missed a whole part of that, but that's okay. The bow and arrow, which is her weapon, and she spends the next 2 days hallucinating from the venom in the tracker jackers. And then when she comes to, Rue is... she remembers that Peta saved her life by telling her to run, so it makes her start to question whether he actually is against her or actually he is for her. And again, they're still trying to follow this star-crossed lovers storyline. And so Rue and her make an alliance. Rue is the little girl from District 11. Rue and her make an alliance because she reminds her so much of Prim. And they're able to help each other. Katniss feeds Rue, and then Rue is able to help her with her bee stings from the tracker jacker. It's a fun concept from the bee attack. And they come up with a plan to make the playing field a little more even. So they decide to go and blow up the supplies that the Career Alliance, I think it's the first 4 districts. Maybe, I could be wrong about that. Definitely the first 2, if not the first 4. To blow up their... Well, actually it's to get rid of, and then they find out later that it's mines, and they use the mines to do so. To make it the actual Hunger Games. It's not fair that only part of them are hungry and the other ones are not. Especially because Katniss knows how to hunt, and she's been able to survive so far on her own survival skills. So she and Rue devise a plan to... go and attack their supplies, and the first part of it goes pretty well. She discovers that the traps around the supplies are the mines that were buried under the platforms originally, and the group, the Alliance as I keep calling them, dug up the mines and then reburied them around their pyramid of supplies. And using her bow and arrow and using a sack of apples, she ends up blowing up their supplies, causing herself to probably rupture her eardrum and go deaf in her left ear in the process. Then she manages to escape that and make her way back to the hideout where she and Rue were supposed to meet, but Rue doesn't come back. She waits, and then the next day decides to go find Rue, and then Rue gets caught in a net and is then attacked by another tribute, and she ends up dying. And this is kind of the spark of where Katniss's real rebellion comes in, because realizing that they're nothing more than just pieces of meat to the capital. And the whole point of the Hunger Games is to remind the districts that, one, they should be fighting against each other and not fighting the capital, and to remind the districts that the capital is in fact in control. So in defiance against the capital, she doesn't bury Rue, but she gives Rue kind of a funeral pose, and she covers her with flowers, as opposed to leaving her just bloodied there on the ground like they do with the other tributes. And District 11, not her district but Rue's district, ends up sending her a loaf of bread as a thank you, which is a really sweet moment in the book that's not in the movie. And again, I'll talk about my problem with the movie here in just a moment. So yeah, and she moves on, and this sparks a different kind of anger in her and a fury towards being trapped in this situation that's not really her, that's not her fault. To an extent, she volunteered for it, but I mean, like, it's not the people's fault. Why are children fighting against children? I say children. Katniss is 16 in the books, because tributes can be between the ages of 12 and 18 in the novel, if I remember correctly. So the next big event, Katniss mourns Rue's death for a while. And when I say a while, I mean it takes like several pages. I don't actually know the time period that passes. They're not very good, and part of that is because the game makers can alter the weather, they can alter the time, so it's hard to tell how many days have actually passed, and the only concept of time that she has is based on where the sun is in the sky. So the next thing that really happens to kind of snap her out of everything is this announcement that 2 winners can be announced this year if they're both from the same district. And because she knows that Peta hasn't died yet, they announce the deaths at the end of every day, she decides to go and form an alliance with Peta, and they can survive together. And so the next portion of the book is her trying to track him down and figure out what was he thinking, why, where would he go, because clearly he was injured when he came back to save her after the wasp attack. So she ends up tracking him down, and he is badly injured. He took a severe cut to the thigh that has since become infected, and he's in pretty bad shape. He's suffering from blood poisoning at the time, and just a pretty bad infection. So they managed to make a shelter in a cave that's nearby, and the romance kind of buds between them. Now the issue is Katniss never really had romantic feelings for Peta, but Peta has romantic feelings for her, and she realizes that she cares a lot more than she thinks she does, thinks she does, and also because she has Haymitch, their mentor, kind of in her head telling her how to get sponsors, how to get medicine, how to get these little parachutes that drop down that are gifts from people who send you things in the games. She plays up the romance quite a bit. They have passionate kisses and kind of intimate conversations, and she plays up the romance a little and realizes that she feels something for him. It may not necessarily be romance to the way that Peta feels it, but she feels something. So over the next few days, I'm saying days, I say days because it was like chapters in the book. I think the whole games in the book take 18 days, I think. I could be incorrect about that. She mentions 2 weeks at some point in the games, but I think it's 18 days, the first the Hunger Games, the 74th annual Hunger Games. So while they're in the cave, Peta's infection gets worse. And she realizes that in order to save his life, she's going to need medicine that they don't currently have. And in the nick of time, there is another announcement that there's going to be a feast. And the point of this is to try to... Yeah, that's right. Is to try to drive all the tributes together, because apparently nothing has happened the last couple of days. And the remaining districts, there's all a gift for each of them, something that they desperately need at this feast. Back at the start of where they were all released into the arena. Peta tries to convince her not to go, and she lies to him and says that she's going to go, or she won't go, and then realizes that he will die if she doesn't. But he doesn't want to risk her life, but she doesn't want to risk his life. It's a whole romantic kerfuffle there. And then a sponsor from Haymitch sends her a sleeping potion, and she knocks him out. In my head, it's NyQuil, but she gives him NyQuil essentially to make him sleep so that she can go and get the medicine and come back. So she goes and she has a couple of interactions. She sees Foxface, who is another tribute. An interesting character that we don't see a lot about. I kind of wish there was a little more backstory on her. But either way, she sees her, and then she's encountered by one of the careers, and it looks like she's going to be severely injured. But then Thresh, who's also from District 11, Rue's old district, ends up saving Katniss and lets her go because of what she did for Rue, the little girl from District 11. So Katniss makes it back to Peta and is able to give him the medicine. And then over the next couple of days, they over the next time period, they hunt. And then there is a situation where Katniss is out hunting and realizes that Peta is too loud to be with her to go hunting. So she sends him to go foraging for roots and berries and things like that while she goes hunts. She comes back and realizes that some of their food is missing. She notices it and gets mad at him, at Peta, for eating without her. And then she realizes that the berries that he's collected are something called Nightlock, which is a poisonous berry, which can kill you, almost, apparently instantly. And then what they discover is that it wasn't Peta that had eaten without her. Foxface, the tribute that I had just mentioned, had stolen some of their food, thinking it was safe, and ended up eating the Nightlock berries, and it ended up killing her. And that kind of messes with Peta's mindset, because it was the first real kill that he had made. And then they make a plan to take the berries with them in order to take out the main bad guy, Cato, who is a district, I think he's District 1. He's a career tribute. So then I think there is only there's only 3 of them left, possibly 4 at this point in the games. And then they decide that the next day they're just going to go and hunt Cato down. And then they realize that they don't have a choice, because the game makers have turned off the water to the lakes and the streams, so that there's only one place for water to be. So they make their way back to the arena. Peta's leg has gotten better, but it's still not well. And when they make it back to the arena and they have an encounter, they're ready to fight the District 1 tribute. And then the game makers send in the quote-unquote finale, which is a bunch of mutations as they call them, which was a really interesting premise I wish they had played a little bit more on, because Katniss realizes in the midst of this attack from there's 3 of them left, that means there would have been 8. No, I'm lying. 24 minus 3 would be 21. I think it was something like 21 animals. I don't know, there's a bunch of them, and she realizes that they each are either indicative of another tribute, or they were a mutation of the tributes that had died. She recognizes the one for Rue. She recognizes the one for Glimmer, which was a girl from District... I think she was from District 1. No, District 2. She recognizes Thresh's. She recognizes that whatever they did to the tributes, when they take away their bodies, they've turned into a mutation. This isn't followed in the book. Not really, at least not in the first book. After it's mentioned, it's like never mentioned again, and then the next biggest obstacle is trying to kill Cato, so that they are eventually the winners of the Hunger Games. So they're sitting on top of this cornucopia, all three of them, Cato, Peta, and Katniss. And throughout a fight, it looks like they're going to lose. Cato has Peta in a headlock, and she's able to shoot Cato enough for Peta to help and knock him off the cornucopia. And then for the next several hours, he's slowly torn apart by these mutations until Katniss decides to finally kill him. But then there's no victor sound, there's no trumpet. And then the voice over the intercom comes back on and says that the previous rule that 2 winners could be announced has been revoked, and now only 1 victor can be announced. So that means that Katniss and Peta have to kill each other. So what they decide to do, because they both agree that they're not going to kill each other, it's not worth it. So what they decide to do is the nightlock berries that Katniss had carried with her, they split between the 2 of them and decided that suicide was better than being the victor and having to kill the other person. So at the same time, they both pop the nightlock berries in their mouth, and then the game maker's like, no, stop. And they end up shutting down the games and announce that Peta and Katniss are the victors. So they're taken out of the arena, and Peta is taken and given medical care for his leg. Katniss is also healed from all of her burns and wounds and everything in a hospital setting. And then they come back, and they're reunited on stage, but not before Haymitch tells her that the Capitol is furious with her for showing them up, essentially, by not giving them the 1 victor that they wanted and kind of breaking the rules to a certain extent. So he said that the only way for her to survive is to keep up this love affair image between her and Peta, and that she was just so in love that she couldn't help herself. She couldn't imagine a day without him. And so they have some final interviews, and then they're on their way back to District 12 when Katniss kind of lets it slip that she doesn't feel romantically towards Peta the way Peta feels towards her. And you can tell that Peta is heartbroken, and then as they go back into District 12, he kind of says, actually I think ends it on just, hey, 1 more for the camera, and decides to keep up this facade. And that's how the first book ends. Obviously, I skipped over a lot of parts because it's a long book. So, my opinions on the book. Overall, I thought it was very good. I expected to go into it the same way I did with Twilight. Twilight is not my favorite, or 50 Shades of Grey, another book that I read because it was popular, but not one that I actually really enjoyed. This one, something about the character of Katniss really kind of just rang true to me. The going deaf in her left ear was part of it, except for she doesn't keep that injury, which is heartbreaking. They really kind of lean on the fact, when I say they, I mean Suzanne Collins, the author, leans on the fact that she wasn't typically beautiful. She was kind of awkward. She was a survivor. She wasn't relying on her looks and beauty and love. And the love that's in her life, in terms of Peta, is one that she's kind of forced into. So there's a fun play on feminism there, where she could just be this really tough badass, but instead she now has to kind of play the damsel in distress romantically, and there's something that I kind of resonate with that concept. I liked that concept of being put in that typical position of a heroine, not by choice. The survival skills were really cool too, and the way she thought she was very clever, and I liked that she's not described as beautiful in the book. She's actually described as really rough in a couple of areas, and so that part of the novel I actually really enjoyed. With the dystopian themes in terms of the government and things like that, they're pretty commonplace, but I liked the aspect of keeping the districts separate and targeted toward each other with these games, because the district that has a winner is rewarded. So it's in the district's benefit to not like the other districts, because if they did, they could all rise up against the government. And the games kind of remind them that, one, the government is in control, but two, that they should not be allies because there's bigger rewards at the end if they just do what they're told. So overall, I really, really liked the novel. I read through it very quickly, and I found myself reading. I give myself an allotted, I aim for 20 minutes a day now to read. Sometimes I go longer, sometimes I go shorter. It just depends on whatever time frame I've given myself. And for this one, especially towards the middle of the book, where you're really kind of, your imagination kind of takes off and you can really envision what it looks like, I definitely got stuck there. And yeah, it was really well written. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So now let's talk about the movie. This particular novel, in my opinion, was too complicated to be a movie. I don't necessarily mean the plot, but there were so many little details that had aha moments that I think this particular story for the first novel, I think would have been better in a short series, personally. Not all novels are like that. For example, Harry Potter, I think, was perfectly fine for a movie. I think the adaptation was perfectly fine. But there were so many different episodic elements to the Hunger Games novel that I think it could have been a 6 or 7 episode season, and each episode would have been thoroughly important. And it would have given them more a chance to make the dramatic moments a little more dramatic. And specifically, what am I talking about? The first one that comes to mind. In the movie, the reaping happens about 10 minutes in. You don't have a chance to learn who Katniss is or who Prim is to Katniss. We get a quick conversation, like she wakes up crying and, okay, we understand they're supposed to be important. But in the novel, that moment where she volunteers for Prim and the salute that her people of District 12 give her is so much more emotional in the novel. You can feel it more than in the movie, where it really felt kind of forced. It felt forced. It felt like, oh, there's this symbol and we're supposed to know what that means, and we just don't. And part of the other issue, and I think this was one of the issues that happened with both Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey as well, there's a lot of internal dialogue. I mean, the second half of the movie, when they're in the actual Hunger Games, Katniss doesn't speak because she's by herself in the woods, and all the dialogue in the novel usually happens in her head. And narration doesn't do well in films. So I think with a series, you can slow it down a little bit and give you more time to show what she is thinking rather than narrate. And then, yeah. I also think that things like Rue at the end, towards the end when she has this alliance with Rue, that takes up 10 minutes in the film, 15 minutes in the film, I think, and even that might be exaggerated. And that was a really big turning point for Katniss in the novel. And in the film, I didn't feel any chemistry between those two characters at all. And that's unfortunate because it could have been done so much better. So, did they stay faithful to the book? More or less. They cut out parts I don't understand why they cut out. I don't know why Peta didn't lose his leg in the movie. Maybe that will be shown to have relevance later in the films. I don't know. I've only seen The Hunger Games, and I've only read The Hunger Games. I have not read Catching Fire. I haven't seen it, and I haven't read Mockingjay either. So I'm not sure about that. To the plot, yes, it stayed relatively faithful. They added characters in that I think did a good job of explaining what we didn't already know. For example, there's a game maker character that's included, and we don't ever see them in the novel themselves. Maybe in the future novels, they're setting it up for them to have a plot later. That might very well be a thing. But in the novel, with Katniss and her interaction with the Hunger Games, she refers to the game makers as kind of an entity, with the exception of when she's in the training room, she never sees them. She doesn't have any interactions with them. And there's no indication that they have a vendetta against her. But in the movie, it's shown like they actively just don't like her, which I thought was an interesting play because they had no reason to not like her yet. Certain things that they couldn't actually, let's twist, portrayals of certain events. I've already said that I thought that they should have extended the story to longer. Like I said, I think a series would have been effective. Different portrayals in the movie. I'm sure that Jennifer Lawrence is a wonderful person. I'm sure that she is a fantastic actress. She is not my favorite of actresses. I haven't particularly liked her in anything I've seen her in. And her portrayal of Katniss Everdeen was disappointing for a couple of reasons, some of which were her fault, some of which were not her fault. The script was not her fault. The script itself was pretty not amazing, in my opinion. But also, Jennifer Lawrence was too pretty to play Katniss because Katniss is actively portrayed as not the beautiful woman in the tributes. And no one can argue that Jennifer Lawrence isn't beautiful. She is. She's just a beautiful. She is stereotypically attractive. Typically attractive? Whatever. Katniss Everdeen in the novel is described as having olive skin, gray eyes, and straight black hair. Jennifer Lawrence is none of those things. I was really, really hoping for my moment of Native American warrior as Katniss Everdeen because she had all of those elements with the bow and arrow and being good with hunting and her connection to animals and understanding them. There was just such a perfect moment. And also with the racial divides that are actually portrayed in the novel, with the more wealthy districts are known as having blonde hair, being paler in skin. District 11, Rue and Thresh are both described as having darker skin. They're not described as being black or African American, but they are described as having dark brown skin, dark brown eyes, thick curly hair. Whereas in the movie, actually their portrayal of Rue was okay in the movie, in my opinion. And same thing with Thresh. He was described as a mountain of a man. But Katniss Everdeen, I really thought could have been portrayed by someone who didn't look like Jennifer Lawrence. Other nitpick with Katniss in particular was the braid. She mentions in the novel at least 6 times that her trademark braid is a braid straight down her back. And the entire movie, Jennifer Lawrence's character has it braided to a side, and it drove me nuts because that simplicity and practicality was a symbol, a motif of who Katniss was, and it drove me nuts that it was off to the side. She braided her hair to the side one time in the novel, and it was never braided like that again, especially in the Hunger Games. She braided it the way she knew how. To get it up out of her face and to the side is annoying, especially to any woman who's ever worn it that way. It drove me nuts. Anyway. Okay, moving on. Gail, I thought, was portrayed perfectly fine. I didn't have any arguments. He didn't have a huge role in the novel, and they chose a gorgeous actor to portray him. I think it was Liam Hemsworth. I could be incorrect about who the actor is there. But very handsome character, and Gail is described as being very handsome in the novel. Prim, give or take, there was such a lack of chemistry between her and Katniss in the movie that I don't remember what Prim looked like. And Prim was a large character in Katniss's mind throughout the novel. So again, because that part of it was so rushed, it caused an issue for me. Then we get to Peta. The other tributes are not really identified by their structure. Haymitch, you could argue that his hair wasn't right, but I thought Woody Harrelson did an excellent job in portraying a drunken tribute. I believed him. He had the right attitude, in my opinion. Same thing with Effie Trinket. The president we saw only really at the end, and I like Donald Sutherland, so I have no complaints about that. And he wasn't really portrayed in any particular way. The interviewer, his last name was Tolucci, and I can't remember his first name now. I've never seen him do something I didn't like. He has the over-the-top personality to wear blue hair and make it work, so I had no issue with that either. Peta, however, okay, in the novel, Peta was charismatic, he was entertaining, he was funny, he had a personality. He was actually someone that by the end of the novel, you felt for him because you knew that he was trying to be tough and he really did genuinely care for Katniss. And you were kind of like, hey, you know, she could end up with either one and I'd be cool with it. You know, Katniss reflects more on Gail in her memory than she does on Peta, but just Peta's personality, you're drawn to him as a character. I forgot I was eating. Peta in the movie, they babyfied him, and I hated it. And I don't mean from an appearance standpoint. From an appearance standpoint, he was fine. But Peta in the movie had absolutely no redeeming quality at all. From the moment he steps out as a tribute, he's just in shock and terror. Now, they do comment on him crying, but it's not described in a way that is cringeworthy. And he has genuine anger and frustration towards the whole thing. He's a genuinely noble character throughout the entire novel. But in the movie, as soon as they had him announced, he was so bland. And as soon as they announced that he was in love with Katniss, that was literally all that he had going for him. I've never wanted a character to die that I knew was going to live so much before in my life. All of the things that made Peta a good character in the novel were just lacking for the movie version of the character. He was not a survivalist at all. So there is a scene where he has escaped Cato and he's before Katniss finds him, and she finds him because he's managed to camouflage himself into the surrounding the surrounding area. And in the novel, it's kind of portrayed as if that's his way of, he can't chase after them, so he'll be prepared when they come find him. Whereas in the movie, it's just like he's desperate, hoping someone is going to come and take care of him. And it just, the whole chemistry that was found in the cave just wasn't there. And I think I'm more irritated by Peta's portrayal than I was by Katniss. Because you could pull off the Katniss thing because she came off in the novel as being kind of awkward around people, but Peta was a character you actually liked and you felt for, and he was interesting and funny. He made jokes up until the very end. In the movie, he just wasn't. In the movie, you were like, really? Girl, I feel you for being forced to kiss this particular character. Because in the novel, she starts to enjoy the romantic interaction. In the movie, you're like, ugh! So I think that's a couple of my biggest pet peeves would, I feel like the whole thing could be done better with proper, I don't want to say proper because that indicates that there's something wrong, with better casting, more optimal choices for casting. Anything? Oh, the costumes, the portrayal in the costumes, it's impossible to do what Suzanne Collins did on paper in real life unless it's animated. So I thought the costuming could have been done way better, but computer generation was what it was back when this movie came out. So there were characters in the movie that were not in the novels, which I'm hoping will be set up for later in the sequels. I'm hoping that they'll serve a purpose and they had kind of a full goal, an overarching goal with all of this. But I think overall that was what I had to comment on. Again, I really enjoyed the novel. I thoroughly recommend that you read it. It is a quick read. It's about 300 pages. It took me about a week, I think, to get through. Very well written. The movie, I do not recommend. So if I were to let's give them a rating. Let's go ahead. We'll do that. We'll give them a rating. I am not going to finish my french fries. So, out of 10, let's go out of 5. Out of 5, I would give the novel a solid 4. Very compelling. It made me want to keep reading. I'm looking forward to reading the sequel. Characters were good. I like the underlying themes. If there was anything to improve on, it is written for kind of a more juvenile audience. I would have liked some more. The language could have been a little bit more advanced. There could have been, it's just, there's always something to perfect on. Because I think it is juvenile fiction, so there is that to be considered. Then, for the movie, out of 5, I don't know. Even the first part, they took 18 cuts to show her hunting a bird. It was hard to watch. It was flat. It didn't do the characters or the novel justice. I don't want to watch the sequel. I will, but I don't want to. It made a very interesting story quite bland. So if I were to give it out of 5, I'd give it a 2 out of 5. I think that's a fair. It wasn't the worst thing I've ever seen. I would not watch it again. No, I wouldn't. I'd read the novel again, but I would not watch the movie again. I didn't see anything worth watching a second time. So I think that's where I stand on the 2. Overall, thank you very much. Again, we're trying this out. If it works, great. If it doesn't, I may continue to do it anyway because it's my channel. So, as always, like, comment, subscribe, share. Thank you very much for joining me, and may the odds be ever in your favor.